"You're overreacting," David said without even looking up from his phone. "This whole council thing, why do you care so much?" I stood there in the kitchen, still holding the folded section of the newspaper in my hand. The city council was set to vote on a rezoning proposal that would bulldoze the park down the street. Our park, where Emma learned to ride her bike, where I used to walk with my late husband every Sunday after church, where neighborhood kids still played pickup baseball. That park wasn't just green space, it was memory, and it mattered. "The vote is next Thursday," I said quietly. "There's still time to get signatures, maybe speak at the meeting." David snorted, his thumb tapping against the screen. "Mom, your opinion doesn't matter here." I stared at him. My son, the boy I raised through scraped knees and high fevers, the one who used to run into my classroom after school, flinging his backpack onto the chalk-dusted floors, grinning as if the world hadn't hardened him yet. Now he sat at our kitchen island, legs crossed, phone in hand, with a dismissiveness that cut deeper than he knew. He didn't see the way my hands trembled slightly as I folded the newspaper and set it gently beside the toaster. He didn't see the way my lips pressed together, holding back the 1,000 things I wanted to say, not because I was weak, but because I knew silence in the right moment was power. "Well," I said finally, "thank you for the clarity." Jennifer walked in then, carrying her tablet and coffee. She was always perfectly put together, slacks with knife-sharp creases, a silk blouse that never seemed to wrinkle. "What's going on?" she asked, glancing between us. "Mom wants to go to the council meeting," David said with a smirk. "To save the trees or whatever." I turned toward the sink and rinsed my hands. My voice was calm. "I want to save the park where your daughter plays." Jennifer sighed, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Margaret, it's complicated. The city needs revenue. It's just not worth getting worked up over." I dried my hands slowly, folded the towel, and laid it on the counter. I didn't speak again that night. That was the moment. Not when they moved my favorite chair to the guest room, not when my bedtime story time with Emma quietly vanished from her routine. Not even when the kitchen was reorganized without a word. It was that moment when my son told me I didn't matter that I felt something shift inside. I had spent my entire life teaching civics, government, the architecture of power. For 40 years, I stood in classrooms filled with high school juniors and seniors, guiding them through the Constitution, the branches of government, how change doesn't always roar, it often whispers and then echoes. My opinion didn't matter? We'd see about that. The following morning, I rose before the sun. The house was still and silent, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of old wood beneath my feet. I sat at the kitchen table and sipped my tea in the dark, the warmth steadying me. The council meeting wasn't until Thursday, but there was something I needed to prepare long before that. I retrieved the manila folder from the back of my closet, the one that held my credentials, commendations, and retirement papers. I had forgotten how heavy it was, not physically, but in presence. Inside were my old student essays, copies of letters from colleagues, even a photograph of me standing beside Representative Linda Harlow at a literacy advocacy event back in '98. It wasn't just nostalgia, it was proof. I'd shaped minds, I'd cultivated voices, and I still had mine. When Emma came into the kitchen at 7, her backpack already slipping from one shoulder, she saw me at the table with my reading glasses perched low. "Grandma," she said, climbing into the chair beside me, "are you mad at Daddy?" "No, sweetheart," I said, brushing her braid back gently, "just thinking about how important it is to speak up when something matters." She nodded solemnly, in that way kids do when they understand more than we expect. "You always say that, even when it's scary." "That's right," I smiled, "even when it's scary." Later that day, I stopped by the neighborhood library. The community bulletin board was cluttered with missing pet flyers, tutoring ads, and an invitation to join the local knitting group. I pinned a printed flyer of my own. Community voices needed. Save Oak Meadow Park. City Council meeting Thursday, 6:30 p.m. Public comments welcome. The librarian glanced at it, then at me. "You're organizing." "Just reminding people they still have a voice," I said. She smiled. "Good, we need more of that." I visited the dry cleaners next, then the corner market, and then the senior center. I didn't plead or rant. I just spoke plainly, from experience, from heart. A few nodded, others hesitated, but by the end of the afternoon, I had 3 volunteers for flyers, and one old student, Reggie Wilkins, now a community columnist, who said he'd write a piece for the Wednesday paper. When I returned home that evening, the dinner table was already set. Jennifer had made pasta, something heavy with garlic. She looked up from her plate. You were gone all day. I had some errands, I said. David glanced up. Everything okay? Just fine, I replied, folding my coat over the back of the chair. By the way, if the council meeting comes up on the news later this week, you might see me. Jennifer paused, fork halfway to her mouth. See you? I signed up to speak. I poured myself a glass of water. 3 minutes. Public comment section. David blinked. You're seriously doing this? I sat down, took a sip, and met his eyes directly. Yes. For the first time in weeks, they didn't have anything to say. That night, I took Emma upstairs and tucked her in. She asked me to read the same story I used to read every Thursday before they changed the schedule. The Listening Tree. A tale of a tree that heard everyone's secrets and held them safe. I read slowly, letting my voice fill the room like it used to. As I closed the book, Emma looked at me sleepily. You're going to tell them why the park is special? I kissed her forehead. Yes, darling, I'm going to tell them everything. 6 months earlier, on a cold Thursday morning, I had handed David the deed to my home. We were seated at the dining table, Emma coloring quietly nearby, unaware of the quiet shift happening between generations. I had signed with a blue pen, the same kind I'd used for 40 years to grade term papers and final exams. My name glided onto the paper with practiced ease, my fingers barely trembling as I placed it beside his. David smiled faintly, the kind of smile he used when he'd already made up his mind. It's for tax purposes, he explained, as if I needed convincing. You'll still live here, of course. Nothing changes. But Jennifer and I can handle the property taxes, the filings, streamline everything. Jennifer chimed in from the kitchen, her voice light and efficient. My background in accounting makes it easier. Trust me, we'll manage it all together. You've done enough, Margaret. It's time you let us take care of things. I'd nodded, not because I didn't understand what it meant. I did, but I wanted to believe this was partnership, not prelude. The house had never been just a structure to me. It was the place where I brought David home from the hospital, a tiny thing swaddled in blue, where we'd carved pumpkins, taped spelling words to the fridge, celebrated straight-A report cards with homemade banana bread. It was where I'd held his father's hand as the cancer dimmed him day by day, where we'd sat together afterward, in silence, piecing life back into place. It wasn't just a house, it was my entire adult life, etched into wood and drywall, and when I handed over the deed, I wasn't giving up ownership. I thought I was passing on legacy. Are you sure? I remember asking quietly. Once it's done, it's done. David had reached over and squeezed my hand. We're a team, Mom. This is just paperwork. You'll always have a place here. Jennifer came over then, carrying a tray of coffee. She set it down with her usual perfection, not a single spill. One big happy family, managing everything together, she said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I wanted to believe her. I really did. In the months that followed, my role shifted in imperceptible ways. At first it was just the chair, my chair, the faded blue recliner with the small tier near the seam, relocated to the spare room. I hadn't asked why, it just wasn't in the living room anymore. Then came the kitchen chart, a dry erase schedule with cooking times and cleanup slots, written in Jennifer's tidy, slanted handwriting. My name was neatly penciled in, breakfast prep, 6:37, no overlapping prep times. I told myself it was efficient, organized, a way to share space. The bookshelf in the hallway, the one filled with children's classics and old family albums, was quietly rearranged one day. The albums were boxed and moved to the closet. In their place, new photo frames, professionally done shots of David, Jennifer, and Emma in a pumpkin patch at the beach in front of a glossy fireplace appeared. Not one included me. I didn't complain. I simply adjusted. I shifted my dinners earlier, so I wouldn't be in the way. I tiptoed around my own kitchen, waiting until the stove was free. I began retreating to my room after dinner, claiming tiredness, when really it was a desire to avoid feeling like a guest in my own home. One evening, I walked past the living room and heard Emma ask Jennifer, "Why doesn't Grandma tell me stories anymore?" Jennifer laughed lightly, not cruelly, but with an edge of finality. "Grandma needs her rest, sweetie. We don't want to overwhelm her." It wasn't said with malice, but it was said with intention. I stood just beyond the archway, listening to my granddaughter ask for me and being told I was fragile, tired, no longer the storyteller I'd been. I felt myself withdrawing, not because they asked me to, but because the invitation to stay present had been silently rescinded. At dinner, conversations began happening without me. "We'll talk about it later," David would say to Jennifer if I asked what was going on, When I tried to weigh in on Emma's school project or mention the rezoning flyers I'd seen at the library, Jennifer would smile gently and say, "Let's not worry you with all that." I started to wonder when, exactly, I had gone from matriarch to footnote. One Sunday afternoon, they hosted a barbecue for their friends from the real estate firm. I helped set up the chairs and slice watermelon. But when the guests arrived, I became invisible. I wasn't introduced. No one asked who I was. I served lemonade to a group of women who didn't even meet my eyes. I overheard one of them ask Jennifer, "Is that your nanny?" Jennifer chuckled, didn't correct her. That night, I stared at the ceiling long after the house went quiet. The fan made soft clicking noises as it turned, and my hands ached in that familiar way they did when a storm was coming. My mother used to say that pain could be a compass. I think she was right. It was just a few days later that I overheard the conversation by the kitchen window. I had returned early from my walk, my shoes crunching softly over the gravel path that lined the side of the house. "She's too involved in everything," Jennifer said. "She actually thinks she has a say in Emma's discipline, in our finances, in community stuff. It's embarrassing." David's reply was clipped, certain, "We need to make it clear that her opinions don't matter anymore. She's living in our house now." I stopped in the shadow of the maple tree, the one we planted the year David turned 5. I pressed a hand to its trunk and stayed very still. My opinion didn't matter. I was living in their house now. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at my desk and opened my old planner. I began listing names, former colleagues, committee contacts, retired school board members. I hadn't used the list in years, but their numbers came back to me like muscle memory. I didn't know what I was going to do yet, but I knew this much: I was no longer going to wait for permission to exist. I may have handed over a deed, but I had not handed over my voice. Jennifer's voice was bright with practiced concern, as if we were discussing curtains instead of exile. "Maybe it would be better if you found somewhere more suitable for your needs," she said, sliding a mug of peppermint tea across the table without asking if I wanted it. Her tone was gentle, but her eyes didn't soften. "Somewhere with people your own age, with activities designed for seniors. You know, a real community." I glanced down at the tea, steam curling upward like a whisper, and then at the spot on the table where Emma once spilled juice during a spelling bee celebration. I had scrubbed that stain for 10 minutes before giving up. The faint ring was still there. David entered the room then, holding his phone and wearing the look of someone who wanted to be anywhere else. He hovered near the doorway, like he didn't want to be seen endorsing what was coming, but also didn't want to stop it. "We've been talking," he said finally. "Just thinking long term. You'd be happier with more independence, privacy, your own space." I set my hands in my lap and looked at him steadily. "This is my space." His gaze dropped to the floor. "It's just not working, Mom, you know it." Jennifer folded her hands on the table. "We're not trying to push you, we just want what's best for everyone." I nodded once, slowly. "I understand," I said quietly. "I'll make arrangements." They both seemed almost relieved at my acceptance, as if confrontation would have been messier, less convenient. Jennifer smiled and patted my hand like a nurse might pat a confused patient. "Thank you for being so reasonable." I stood and carried the untouched tea to the sink, pouring it down the drain with careful silence. My fingers moved steadily, without rush or tremor. What they didn't know, what neither of them ever bothered to consider, was that I had already begun making arrangements. Not for a retirement village or assisted living brochure catalog. My plans didn't include knitting clubs or group bingo. They included timelines, city maps, contact lists, and one very specific goal. They had taken the house, they had taken my place at the dinner table, the living room, the bookshelf, even my role in Emma's bedtime routine, but they had not taken my clarity or my history. That night, I opened the closet and pulled out the small rolling suitcase I'd used during my final year of teaching when I'd traveled to speak at state conferences. It still smelled faintly of pencil shavings and hand lotion. I packed without noise, folding only what I needed: 3 cardigans, 2 pairs of pants, sturdy shoes, a notebook, my reading glasses, and the small leather wallet that held my ID, bank card, and Medicare documents. I paused at my bookshelf, the only one that hadn't been rearranged, and pulled down the small framed photo of Emma on her 6th birthday, holding a balloon shaped like a sunflower. Her grin was wide and genuine, missing 2 teeth. I wrapped it in a scarf and tucked it into the side pouch. Downstairs, the house had gone still. I moved quietly, wheeling my suitcase through the hallway, past the living room where the new leather sectional gleamed under the overhead lights. My chair was gone, but the indentation in the rug where it once sat remained, a shadow of presence, like I had already been erased and the carpet was still adjusting. In the kitchen, I paused by the refrigerator. The dry erase chart was still there. Under Thursday, next to the pink asterisk, it read, "Grandma, breakfast, 6:30, 7." I erased it with one swipe of my sleeve. I left a note on the counter. "Taking some time for myself. We'll be in touch. Mom." The taxi arrived precisely at 9 p.m. The driver, a young man with tired eyes, offered to load my bag, but I held on to it. As he pulled away from the curb, I looked back one last time. Through the front window, I could see the flicker of the television in the living room. David slouched on the couch. Jennifer walked behind him, phone in hand. Neither of them noticed I was gone. I clutched my purse tightly in my lap. Inside, in a red file folder, were documents they'd never asked about, certificates, meeting notes, copies of school district initiatives I had co-authored, a record of who I had been before I was simply Grandma. The hotel room was small, but clean. Beige wallpaper, a humming mini fridge, and a desk with a flickering lamp. I set my suitcase in the corner and sat on the edge of the bed. For the first time in months, I exhaled without bracing. I made tea with the hotel kettle and sat with my notebook. I outlined a list. Contact city clerk about council comment guidelines. Email Reggie Wilkins. Write it guest op-ed. Reconnect with former PTA president. Schedule legal consult regarding deed transfer. The list stretched longer than the page. Each item sharpened me. This wasn't escape, it was redirection. My silence had been their weapon. Now it would be mine. I lay back on the stiff mattress and stared at the ceiling. It was speckled with faint water stains, but I didn't mind. I wasn't looking for luxury. I was looking for clarity. And somewhere between the hum of the AC unit and the ticking of the bedside clock, I found it. I whispered aloud, just once, to the empty room, "They'll hear me." The motel coffee tasted like burnt toast, but I drank it anyway, both hands wrapped around the paper cup like I needed its heat to remind me I was still here. The morning light filtered through the thin curtains, casting long shadows on the beige walls. I'd barely slept, but I wasn't tired. Something inside me had shifted. Not bitterness, not rage, something sharper, something clear. I opened my laptop on the small round table beneath the window. I had notes already from the night before. Names, contacts, action items. But first, I needed to confirm the damage. I dialed the bank. After navigating an endless phone tree, I finally reached a representative. "Mrs. Margaret Patterson," I said, "I need to verify a few things regarding my property." The woman on the line had a pleasant voice and a polite way of delivering unpleasant news. "Yes, we do have your name on file, ma'am. Are you referring to the recent home equity loan application?" My stomach dropped. "What application?" A pause. "There was a loan processed 4 weeks ago, secured against the home at 317 Glenberry Lane. Monthly payments begin next cycle." I gripped the edge of the table. "And who authorized that?" "You're listed as a co-signer, along with Mr. David Patterson." I exhaled slowly through my nose, forcing myself to keep my voice steady. "Can you email me the paperwork?" "Yes, ma'am. I'll do that right away." I hung up and stared at the wall as if the paint might peel back and offer an explanation. The email came 10 minutes later. I clicked the PDF attachment and scrolled through. There it was, my name, my signature, or something that looked close enough. I hadn't signed anything. I hadn't been asked. The house that was supposed to be a sanctuary for my son and granddaughter had become collateral for something I hadn't even known existed. At the bottom of the document, in small text, "Loan funds dispersed to Patterson Holdings, LLC." I knew that name. It was the rental property LLC Jennifer had set up 2 years ago. They were expanding, using my house. I pushed back from the table and stood, breathing carefully. I didn't want to cry. I didn't want to scream. I wanted facts. I opened a folder on the desk and pulled out my copy of the deed. My name had been on it for 35 years. Then 6 months ago, I'd let it go. For trust, for family. I picked up my phone again. This time, I called Janet Morrison. She'd taught government at the high school 2 towns over, and last I heard, she'd joined the county's senior advocacy board. She answered on the second ring. "Margaret?" she said, surprised. "Is everything all right?" "I need advice," I said, my voice lower now, steady. "Legal advice, about property fraud, elder financial abuse." There was a pause. Then tell me everything. I walked her through it. David's request to transfer the deed, the sudden shift in household dynamics, the overheard conversation, and now the loan. That's criminal, Janet said sharply. Have you spoken to legal aid yet? I wanted to confirm first. Good. You'll need documents, emails, signatures, anything showing your contribution to the house, bank records, even texts. Do you have access? I do, I said, and I'm organizing everything. Then you're already halfway there. I'll send you a number. They have a department just for this. After we hung up, I sat down again and opened a new document. I titled it Timeline of Events and began typing. I listed dates, when I signed the deed, when I noticed household changes, when I overheard their plan, when I left, and now, when I discovered the loan. Then I attached the PDF from the bank and the original deed I'd kept in a physical folder. I scanned it with my phone and uploaded it all to a secure cloud folder. I wasn't taking chances. By noon, I'd spoken with legal aid. A young lawyer named Eleanor took the case. She was sharp, direct, and already familiar with this kind of thing. This happens more than you'd believe, she said. Seniors coerced into signing over property, then stripped of rights and used as leverage, but the forged signature gives us leverage. We can challenge this. Will I get the house back? I asked quietly. She paused. That depends on how far they've taken it, but we can fight. You have rights. After I ended the call, I sat quietly for a moment. The motel room buzzed with the sound of the mini-fridge, the light hum of passing cars outside. I didn't feel defeated. I felt the click of gears beginning to turn. There was power in documentation, in being believed, in saying this happened, and here is the proof. I reached into my suitcase and pulled out the photo of Emma, still wrapped in the scarf. I set it on the desk. Her smile, caught mid-laugh, seemed to shimmer even in this dull room. They weren't just silencing me, I murmured to the photo. They were using me, and I'm not letting that stand. I dressed carefully before heading out, the wool coat, buttoned up, the red beanie pulled snug over my curls. I looked in the mirror and saw the lines around my eyes, the softness of age, yes, but also the sharpness of memory, of experience. I'd been underestimated before. I'd learned to use it. I took a bus downtown, holding my tote bag close. Inside was a slim file of copies, the deed, the bank statement, a notarized record from 5 years ago confirming the house was mortgage-free. I wasn't going to confront David, not yet. I was going to prepare. At the courthouse, I filed an intent to challenge claim on the loan. It wouldn't stop payments, but it would put a flag on the property and delay any further transactions. The clerk didn't blink when I handed her the paperwork. This happen a lot? I asked as I passed over the copies. She nodded. Too much. But most folks don't fight back. I'm not most folks. When I returned to the motel, the light was already fading. I made another cup of that terrible coffee, sat with my laptop, and began drafting an email to the city council. Not about the loan, about the park, because the meeting was still scheduled for Thursday, and no matter what else was happening, I still had my 3 minutes of public comment, and I intended to use them. The air outside City Hall was brisk, carrying with it the faint scent of exhaust and sidewalk steam. I stood beneath the bronze plaque that read Public Access Entrance, clutching my tote bag to my chest. Inside was a printed copy of my speech, a folder of signatures from neighbors I'd gathered in the last 48 hours, and a photograph of the park as it used to be, green, sunlit, alive. A uniformed officer held the door as I stepped in. The hallway smelled faintly of floor polish and bureaucracy. My shoes tapped softly on the tile as I walked toward the sign-in table, the red beanie tugged snug over my head, my coat buttoned to the top. Public comment, the clerk asked. I nodded. Margaret Patterson. Fill this out. He handed me a form and a small numbered tag. You're speaker 12. The waiting area outside the chambers was already half full. A young couple sat to my left, murmuring about parking permits. A man in a suit flipped through his notes, eyes narrowed. I chose a seat by the window, letting the afternoon light fall across my lap as I reviewed my speech one last time. It wasn't long. I had practiced in front of the motel mirror that morning, over a cup of tea, and a quiet conversation with myself. 3 minutes. That was all we got. But 3 minutes was plenty if you used them wisely. When the doors opened, we filed in slowly, taking our places along the benches. The chamber had that tired civic feel, wood paneling, rows of foldable chairs, microphones that always crackled once before they worked. Council members sat in a crescent, shuffling papers, adjusting their nameplates, making small talk as the public settled in. The chairwoman cleared her throat and tapped her mic. We're now moving into public comment. Please remember to state your name and address for the record. You'll have 3 minutes. Please keep all remarks civil and relevant. One by one, speakers approached. The couple spoke about rising permit fees. The man in the suit made an impassioned plea about zoning variance. A teenager in a school hoodie read a statement about school lunch funding. Then it was my turn. Speaker 12, the clerk called. Margaret Patterson? I stood and felt the weight of every step as I approached the podium. I unfolded my paper carefully, adjusted the mic, and looked out at the half-attentive faces before me. My name is Margaret Patterson. I live or lived at 317 Glenberry Lane. A few eyes lifted. The chairwoman nodded. I'm here today to speak not just for myself, but for the people who walk to that park every evening after dinner, for the parents who teach their children to ride bikes on the winding paths, for the widows who sit quietly on the benches watching the world continue without their spouses, for the teenagers who don't have money for movies but can still find freedom in grass and sky. I held up the photo. The park glowed behind me, sun-drenched and wide. That space belongs to memory, to the people who built lives beside it. Turning it into a parking lot for a development complex isn't progress, it's erasure. A murmur of agreement rolled from the back row. My opinion may not matter in my own house anymore, but it matters here, and I'm using it while I still have breath. I stepped back. My hands didn't shake. The room was silent for a beat longer than normal. The chairwoman gave a short nod. Thank you, Miss Patterson. I returned to my seat. The man beside me whispered, You taught, didn't you? Civics, I said. Figured. After the session ended, a young woman with a Channel 7 press badge caught me just outside the chambers. Mrs. Patterson, I'm with WZFT. That was powerful. We're doing a segment on the rezoning issue. Would you be willing to speak on camera? I hesitated. My instinct was to shrink, to protect the privacy I'd been clinging to like a quilt in a storm. But then I remembered Emma. I remembered David's words. Your opinion doesn't matter here, Mom. I turned to the reporter. Yes, I think I would. She handed me a card and asked if we could schedule an interview by Friday. It's a community interest piece, she explained, but we think it could run wider. Back at the motel, I laid the business card beside the photo of Emma and poured myself another cup of tea. The night buzzed softly with possibility. I turned on the news and sat through the city council recap. My name wasn't mentioned, but the vote had been delayed. They'd cited community response as a factor needing review. It wasn't a win. Not yet, but it was a pause. And in politics, a pause is oxygen. My phone buzzed with a text. Unknown number. Nice speech, Mom. You could have told us where you were. Jennifer's furious. I stared at the screen for a long moment before pressing delete. Then I added a final note to my list. Prepare for interview. Speak truth. Speak calm. I arrived at the Channel 7 studio just after noon on Friday, clutching my tote bag like armor. The building was all glass and steel, the kind of modern place that hums with quiet urgency. I'd worn my navy slacks, the ones I used to wear on parent-teacher conference nights, and a soft gray sweater under my wool coat. The red beanie stayed on. I wasn't here to pretend I was someone else. I was here as myself. The receptionist smiled and pointed me to a waiting area with low couches and framed front pages on the walls. The hum of voices and camera clicks echoed faintly down the hall. I sat with my back straight, hands folded in my lap. I didn't rehearse my words. I didn't need to. The truth had lived in me for months. A few minutes later, the young reporter from City Hall, Leah, stepped into the lobby, microphone in hand, ponytail bouncing slightly as she walked. Mrs. Patterson, she said brightly, thank you for coming. We're all set up. Follow me? I stood, nodding politely. It's Margaret. Please. She led me through a hallway lined with lighting equipment and soundproof doors. At the end was a small studio, walls padded, cameras on tripods, a desk with a Channel 7 banner. A technician adjusted a boom mic while another woman checked the lighting on a monitor. We'll keep it conversational, Leah said as she guided me to a chair across from hers. Nothing scripted, we just want to hear your story. Speak from the heart, just like you did at the council meeting. I sat down and adjusted the hem of my sweater beneath the coat. That I can do. She smiled and gave a thumbs up to the cameraman. Rolling in 3, 2. The light clicked on. Leah turned slightly toward me. Today we're speaking with Margaret Patterson, a retired teacher and longtime resident of Glenbury Lane, who's recently become a surprising voice in the fight against local rezoning. Margaret, thank you for joining us. Thank you for having me, I said, my voice steady. Leah leaned in slightly. Can you tell us what inspired you to speak up at the city council meeting this week? I paused for a breath. I spent 40 years teaching civics, how government works, why voice matters. I always told my students that democracy isn't just voting every few years, it's speaking up when no one's looking. For a long time, I stopped doing that myself. Then one day, someone told me my opinion didn't matter anymore. That was enough. Leah nodded, eyes wide with the kind of quiet respect you can't fake. That's someone being your family? I looked straight into the lens. My son and his wife. They asked me to transfer the deed to my home under the pretense of helping with taxes. I trusted them. Months later, I learned they'd taken out a loan against the house, one I never agreed to, and slowly began pushing me out. First emotionally, then practically. The studio was still. Even the technician stopped fiddling. Leah's voice lowered. And you left voluntarily? I left with a suitcase, a folder of documents, and my dignity, I said. But I didn't leave quietly. I filed a claim against the fraudulent loan. I contacted legal aid. I stood at that podium because I wanted to remind people, especially women my age, that silence doesn't protect you, it erases you. Leah blinked. That's incredibly brave. It's necessary, I said. There's a difference. She glanced at her notes. Do you think this issue, elder financial abuse, is more common than people realize? Far more, I replied. And it's not just about money, it's about control. Families assume that once you're past 70, your needs are simple, that your memories aren't worth defending. But everything I own, everything I built, it came from decades of hard choices. It wasn't theirs to take. There was a pause. Leah smiled softly. What would you say to someone in your position who feels trapped? I met her gaze. Document everything. Find allies, and don't be afraid to be inconvenient. It's easy to dismiss the elderly when we stay quiet. But when we speak, we remind them that we're still here. The interview wrapped 15 minutes later. Leah thanked me again and walked me back through the studio, promising to let me know when the segment would air. It'll run Sunday morning, she said. I think it's going to resonate. Outside, the wind had picked up. I stood on the curb for a moment, waiting for the rideshare I'd scheduled, feeling the cold press against my cheeks, but it didn't sting like it had weeks ago. I felt more awake than I had in months. Back at the motel, I kicked off my shoes and opened my laptop. My inbox had begun to fill messages from community members who'd seen the meeting, old colleagues reaching out with stories of their own, even a note from the PTA chair I hadn't spoken to in 5 years. One message caught my eye. Subject City Voice segment, follow-up opportunity. I clicked it open. Hi Margaret. Saw the council footage. Would love to do a live Q&A next week following the Sunday broadcast. You're the kind of voice we need right now. Let me know. Joel Navarro, senior producer, Channel 7. I stared at the screen, rereading the line, the kind of voice we need right now. I'd been erased from birthday photos, talked over at my own table, treated like a placeholder in the home I once built. And now, here I was, being asked to speak, not as a burden, not as a liability, but as a voice that mattered. I closed the laptop gently and looked at Emma's photo on the desk. I wanted her to see me like this, not the woman waiting in hallways or quietly fading at dinner, but the one who stood in a studio and told the truth without blinking. Next time you see me, little one, I whispered, you'll know why I left. The segment aired just after sunrise on Sunday. I didn't tell anyone to watch. I didn't post a link or forward the promo email from Channel 7. I simply brewed a cup of motel coffee, wrapped myself in my coat, and sat cross-legged on the edge of the bed, the TV remote balanced on my knee. They opened with the footage from City Hall. My voice, measured and clear, filled the tiny room as I stood at that podium and named what had been taken. Then it cut to the studio, to Leah sitting across from me, and my own face staring back at me from the screen, lined, firm, and no longer shrinking. When the segment ended, I muted the television and listened to the silence that followed. It wasn't loneliness, it was quiet acknowledgement. Then my phone began to vibrate, not ring, vibrate, over and over, the way it did when David used to call me in the middle of school meetings he'd forgotten I told him about. But it wasn't a call, it was messages, notifications stacked like bricks. The first was a text. David, Mom, what have you done? People are asking questions. Jennifer's boss saw the interview. The second, David, you made us look like criminals. The third came with a screenshot, comments from Facebook beneath the station's video post. I recognized names, former students, colleagues, even my old neighbor Mrs. Kemper. They weren't vague, they were direct. Mrs. Patterson taught us to speak truth. Now she's living it. This is elder abuse. Shame on whoever thought she'd stay silent. I closed my phone and set it on the nightstand without replying. By noon, I'd received 2 voicemails, one from Jennifer, the other from a number I didn't recognize. I listened to neither, but the text that followed Jennifer's missed call was hard to ignore. Jennifer, we need to talk. You've made this very public, and it's affecting Emma. The use of Emma's name was strategic. I knew it. Jennifer rarely mentioned her in texts unless she wanted to disarm me. I imagined the two of them sitting together that morning, Jennifer rehearsing every word, David pacing. I didn't respond. Instead, I opened my laptop and logged into my email. There were 5 new messages from Channel 7, 2 from senior advocacy groups, and 1 from the city council clerk. The council had voted to table the park development proposal indefinitely. The formal language was dry, but the meaning wasn't lost on me. They'd blinked. The community had spoken. I emailed back a short reply. Thank you for the update, and thank you for listening. At around 3 p.m., I left the motel and walked to the corner store. The air had a sharp bite, and the wind pushed at my coat like it was testing me. I moved slowly, but not from age. I was watching everything, the way people held their phones, the way the clerk did a double take when I stepped up to the counter. You're the one from TV, right? He said, blinking fast. The teacher? I nodded. That's me. You were great, he said. My grandma said you reminded her of herself. She cried. That means more than you know, I said softly. Back at the motel, I found an envelope slid under my door. I bent to pick it up, recognizing David's handwriting immediately. The slant was sharper than usual, less practiced. Inside was a letter, handwritten on notebook paper, a single sheet, folded in thirds. Mom, I don't know why you had to go public. We could have figured this out as a family. Now Jennifer's job is at risk. Emma's classmates are asking questions, and you've made everything worse. We were going to pay you back. The loan was temporary. You didn't have to escalate it like this. I know you're hurt. I know you feel betrayed, but this wasn't malicious. It was messy. That's different. Please stop. Let's just meet. Talk in person. We're still your family. David. I read the letter 3 times. Not once did he apologize. Not once did he admit to forging a signature or pushing me out. The language danced around guilt. It was framed as damage control, not remorse. I folded the letter and returned it to the envelope. Then I slid it into the waste bin beside the desk. That night, I wrote a reply, but not to David. I replied to Joel Navarro, the senior producer from Channel 7. Yes, I'd be open to doing the live Q&A next week. Thank you for the invitation. There's more to say, and I'm ready to say it. Before I went to bed, I stood by the window and looked out over the empty parking lot. My reflection hovered faintly in the glass wool coat, red beanie, tired eyes, but I didn't look broken. I looked like someone who'd decided she would not disappear. Tuesday afternoon brought rain. Not a storm, just the kind of drizzle that made everything feel heavier than it looked. I sat by the motel window with a notepad in my lap, watching water crawl down the glass in slow, wandering lines. The letter from David was gone, shredded, not trashed. It didn't deserve to be whole. The Channel 7 Q&A was scheduled for Friday evening, live. Joel had sent over a sample list of viewer questions, most of them respectful, curious. One asked if I planned to press criminal charges. Another asked if I regretted making the matter public. I didn't. But I knew what that question really meant. Are you sorry for being loud? For being seen? A knock at my door startled me. I hadn't ordered anything. I opened it cautiously, expecting maybe a motel employee with towels. It was Jennifer. She stood there in a charcoal trench coat, her hair damp at the ends, umbrella folded at her side. Her makeup had slipped slightly from the weather, but her expression was intact, tight, polished. "Can I come in?" she asked. I stepped back but said nothing. She walked inside like she was entering a doctor's office, looking around without comment. "It's smaller than I imagined," she said. "I thought you'd be staying with someone, a friend." I closed the door behind her. "Did you drive here alone?" She nodded. "David didn't want me to come." "Then why did you?" She didn't sit, just paced once and then stopped near the foot of the bed. "Because I wanted you to hear it from me before Friday. We didn't mean to steal anything. We just panicked. There was a window on the property investment. We had to move quickly. And David kept saying you'd understand once it paid off. You forged my signature, I said. Her eyes flicked toward mine, just for a second. We used a sample you'd written before, on a shared document. It wasn't personal. It was… She paused. It was fraud, I finished for her. She didn't deny it. You made decisions in my name, I continued, and then you slowly removed me from my own life, my chair, my place in the kitchen, my relationship with Emma. Her shoulders tensed. We didn't remove you, we adjusted. The household needed structure, boundaries. You adjusted me out, I said, like trimming a photo to fit a new frame. There was a long silence. I watched the rain continue its quiet tapping against the window. Jennifer looked down at her hands. Emma's been asking where you are. We told her you needed rest. Rest from what? She didn't answer. I moved to the desk and opened the notebook I'd been writing in. Why now? Why the visit? She hesitated. Because we're afraid you'll destroy what's left. David's firm is already distancing itself. His name's being left off proposals. My job is complicated now. I met her gaze. That's the cost of dishonesty. She stepped closer. What do you want, Margaret? The question wasn't hostile. It was tired. I want you to understand, I said quietly, that I am not your liability. I am not a passive relic you cart around for appearances. I want my name cleared. I want legal restitution. And I want Emma to know I didn't vanish. Jennifer blinked. You'd really press charges? If the law deems it appropriate, yes. Her voice broke slightly. We're not monsters. No, I said. You're two people who thought I wouldn't fight back. She didn't cry, but her mouth trembled like she was close. She straightened quickly and nodded. I said what I came to say. And I heard it. She turned toward the door, hesitated, then looked back. Emma made you something. I'll bring it, if that's okay. It is. And then she was gone. I stood in the center of the room, still holding the notepad. I didn't feel triumphant, but I felt something close to clean. Later that evening, I received an email from legal aid. Eleanor had filed an official complaint with the district court. The forged loan was now part of a fraud investigation. A preliminary injunction had been granted, freezing any further transactions involving the property. I forwarded the email to Joel at Channel 7 with a note. This may come up Friday. Let's not avoid it. By nightfall, I had a new routine. I walked the perimeter of the motel, umbrella in hand, coat buttoned tight. It gave me time to think, time to remember who I was before all of this, before silence became survival. On my third lap around the lot, I passed the small patch of grass between the dumpsters and the back fence. A single dandelion had pushed up through the concrete's edge, its yellow bloom bright even in the wet. It wasn't much, but it had insisted on living where nothing should have. I bent down, touched its stem lightly, and whispered, "That's how we do it." The studio felt colder this time. Not in temperature, but in atmosphere. There was a weight to the air, something that settled between my collarbones like memory. I sat quietly in the guest chair as technicians adjusted the lighting rigs and tested microphones. Joel, the senior producer, stood behind a camera, clipboard in hand, checking final notes. He caught my eye briefly and gave a small reassuring nod. Across from me, the host for the Q&A segment, a composed anchorwoman named Veronica Pierce, scrolled through her tablet. Her blazer was crimson, her presence practiced. She didn't speak to me at first, not out of rudeness, but because this silence, was part of the process. Everyone prepared differently. I folded my hands in my lap and breathed evenly. The wool coat hugged my arms. I hadn't removed it yet. The beanie stayed on. I'd considered taking it off, but something about it, its stubborn warmth, made me feel grounded. I wasn't here to be styled or softened. I was here to answer questions. A voice crackled over the speakers. 2 minutes to live. Joelle stepped forward. You'll get the questions one at a time. Some are pre-screened, others are live call-ins. You're free to decline anything. Veronica knows your boundaries. I nodded once. Thank you. Veronica looked up and smiled politely. We'll start with background, then move into the loan situation. We may get some questions about your son. I'm not here to smear him, I said. I'm here to tell the truth. Her smile widened slightly. Exactly why people are tuning in. I sat back, let the lights do their scanning, let the makeup artist dab the shine from my forehead and retreat like mist. I'd taught in rooms hotter than this, with 40 students watching, some of them waiting for me to slip up so they could test the rules. This wasn't that different. Going live in 5, the voice said. I stared past the cameras and into the center of the room, not focusing on any single thing. I thought about the park, the crooked gate at the south end, the bench Gerald and I used to sit on in the fall, sipping coffee from mismatched thermoses. I thought of Emma's laugh as she fed ducks with bits of bread I always said were too dry to keep. And I thought of the moment David told me my opinion didn't matter. It does, I whispered to myself. The red light blinked on. Veronica spoke first. Good evening, and welcome to Channel 7's Community Spotlight Q&A. I'm joined tonight by Margaret Patterson, a retired civics teacher who's become a leading voice in our city's growing awareness around elder financial abuse and civic engagement. She turned slightly to me. Margaret, thank you for being here. Thank you for making space, I replied. We've received hundreds of questions since your interview aired, she said. Many viewers were struck by your grace, your clarity, and your story. Could you start by telling us what pushed you to finally speak publicly? I sat up straighter. It wasn't one moment, I said. It was a slow unwinding. It started with a request for a deed transfer, supposedly to help with taxes. Then came subtle shifts in my home. I was still living there, but not included. My chair was moved. My voice and decisions began to disappear. I went from being a mother and grandmother to something more like background noise. Veronica nodded. And when did you realize something larger was happening? When I found out they'd taken out a loan against the house I'd paid off decades ago. My name was used falsely. That's when I stopped whispering. The screen behind us showed headlines. Elder fraud, a growing crisis, when silence costs too much. She moved on. We have a caller from Richmond. Go ahead. A woman's voice, soft but strong. Margaret, my mother is in a similar position. She's afraid if she speaks up she'll lose her family entirely. What would you say to someone like her? I felt my chest tighten, not in fear, but in recognition. I would tell her that silence won't protect her, I said. It might delay pain, but it also delays justice. Speaking up doesn't erase your love for your family. It asserts your right to exist fully. We are not burdens, we are people, and we deserve protection, not pity. Veronica was quiet for a second, before moving to the next question. Margaret, have you had any contact with your family since the interview aired? I hesitated. The red light on the camera was unwavering. My daughter-in-law visited, I said. She asked what I wanted. And the truth is, I wanted them to know that what they did has consequences. This isn't revenge, it's responsibility. Another viewer wrote in. Do you think there's a way back for your relationship with your son? My hands folded tighter in my lap. I don't know, I answered, but I know I won't walk backward to find out. The hour passed quickly. Questions about legal rights, about civic action, about women reclaiming agency in the later chapters of life. I answered each one carefully. Not perfectly, but with the steadiness of someone who'd graded 1,000 essays and raised her voice only when it mattered most. When it ended, Veronica reached across the table and touched my hand. You said things people needed to hear. Joel met me by the studio exit. You've started something, he said. You're going to get more calls. I'll be ready. As I stepped outside into the cool night air, the city buzzed softly in the distance. Horns, distant laughter, the occasional hum of traffic. I looked up at the sky. No stars visible, but I didn't need them. I felt seen enough. I returned to the motel that night with a paper bag of lukewarm pad thai and a head full of silence. The kind of silence that doesn't ache but lingers like breath held too long between what's ended and what hasn't yet begun. The Channel 7 interview had aired just an hour earlier, and my phone had been buzzing in fits ever since. I didn't check it. Not yet. I needed the quiet. I needed a moment of stillness without reaction. I set the food down on the dresser, untouched, and walked over to the small table where my notebook sat, closed but waiting. I flipped it open, past the list of names I'd once written on the first day I left home, past the note from legal aid confirming the injunction, past all the scribbled dates and talking points. I stopped on a blank page. I didn't write. I just sat with the pen resting in my hand. When the knock came, I didn't jump. Some part of me had already known it was coming. I opened the door, and there stood David. His coat was thin, his shoes soaked, like he'd walked too far in the wrong weather without planning. He looked older than the last time I saw him, just a week ago, but full of years. He didn't speak at first. His breath puffed visibly in the air between us, and his eyes, dark, familiar, unreadable, settled on the carpet before finally meeting mine. "I saw the segment," he said. I nodded once. I figured. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside. "Only if you plan to speak honestly." He walked in slowly, like the room was a test. He didn't sit. He hovered, taking in the beige walls, the stacked folders, the photo of Emma I kept propped against the lamp base. "Jennifer didn't want me to come," he said. "She's not the one who needs to be here." He swallowed. "You made your point." "That wasn't the point," I replied. "The point was never to hurt you." "Then what was it?" "To stop pretending," I said. "Pretending that I hadn't noticed what was happening. Pretending that my place in your lives wasn't shrinking every day. Pretending you didn't know what that loan meant for me." He sat down on the edge of the bed finally, shoulders folding in like a man defeated, not by war, but by himself. "I didn't think it would get this far," he said quietly. "I thought I could fix it before you found out." "You thought I wouldn't find out," I said. He didn't deny it. "I trusted you, David," I said, my voice even but not soft. "When your father died, I made sure you never went without. I sold my car to pay your college deposit. I packed your lunches through senior year. I never asked for anything back but respect." "I know," he said, barely audible. "But when I gave you that deed, I wasn't giving you power. I was giving you trust. You took one and ignored the other." He closed his eyes. "It was Jennifer's idea, the investment, the way we framed it, but I signed off." "She didn't grow up in that house," I said. "You did." Silence fell between us again, heavy this time. He looked down at his hands. "The loan, it's falling apart. We might lose everything." I nodded. "Then perhaps it's time to learn what it feels like." He looked up. "You're really going to go through with the charges?" "I'm going to let the truth speak. If that leads to charges, then yes. I'm your son." "And I'm your mother," I said. "That used to mean something." He looked like he might cry, but he didn't. Maybe he couldn't. Maybe the distance between us had dried up every tear meant to bridge it. He stood, slowly. I wanted to say it face to face, that I messed up." I nodded. "You did. And I'm sorry." "That's not mine to forgive yet," I said. "That belongs to the woman you tried to erase." He looked confused. I pointed to myself. "This one, the woman who existed before you, decided her voice had expired." He lingered a second longer, then walked to the door. His hand hovered over the handle. "If Emma asks," he began. "She hasn't stopped asking," I said. "You'll have to earn the answer." He opened the door and stepped into the night. I closed it softly behind him. I didn't cry. I didn't collapse. I returned to the table, opened the notebook, and finally wrote. He came. Not to fix it. Not fully, but to face it. And sometimes that's the first crack in the wall. I left the food untouched again. Hunger would return. For now, what I needed was space. Space I hadn't been allowed for years. Space to remember that confrontation doesn't always come with fury. Sometimes it's the quietest thing in the room. 2 days after David's visit, I walked into the Glenbury Public Library through the side entrance, not to check out a book, but to stand in front of a group of strangers who wanted to ask me about justice, family, and silence. The event had been posted on the library's website, under Community Conversations, The Power of Speaking Up. I hadn't chosen the title, but I'd chosen to come. The room wasn't large, just 20 chairs arranged in a horseshoe around a laminated folding table. The crowd was mixed. A few young professionals in their early 30s, a couple of retirees in clean windbreakers, a teenage girl scribbling in a composition notebook. And then there was the woman sitting in the second row, gripping a folded sweater on her lap like it was holding her together. I recognized the look. I'd worn it myself not long ago. "Thank you for coming," the librarian said into a small handheld mic. "Tonight we welcome Margaret Patterson. Many of you may have seen her on Channel 7. She's agreed to share a bit more about what brought her forward and what she's learned." I stepped up slowly and took the mic, scanning the room just long enough to make eye contact with the girl in the notebook. "I taught high school civics for 40 years, I began. In all that time, I said the same thing to my students at the start of each semester. You are not too young to have a voice. I spent years believing that. Then, after I retired, I found myself in a home where my voice slowly disappeared. I didn't even hear it fading. I just adjusted. I let that word sit in the air. It was one people understood more than they admitted. I handed over the deed to my home, I said. I told myself it was practicality, family trust. The paperwork said one thing, but the treatment, over time, said something else. A hand went up. a woman in the back row. Her voice was thin but firm. Do you think it's different when it's family? Harder to see it coming? Yes, I said without hesitation, because family knows the doors you'll never lock, the places you won't push back. A man to my left cleared his throat. Did your son apologize? He did, I answered, and it wasn't enough, but it was real. It doesn't undo the harm, but it names it. The girl with the notebook finally raised her hand. Do you miss them? I paused. I miss what I thought we were, I said, but I've learned to stop grieving a version of a relationship that never really existed. Now I'm working on something different, not louder but truer. Someone clapped once, then a few more joined in, not for a show, just enough to break the hush that had wrapped around us like static. Afterward, people stayed. They approached slowly, one or two at a time. A man in his 50s whispered, "My sister did the same thing to my mother." A younger woman pressed my hand and said, "You reminded me that I don't have to be polite about being hurt." And then the woman from the second row stood in front of me. She looked at me for a long moment, her mouth trembling. "I haven't spoken to my daughter in a year," she said. "Not since she asked me to co-sign a mortgage and then froze me out." "I'm sorry," I said softly. "I don't want revenge," she whispered. "I just want to stop feeling erased." I took both her hands. "Then start writing your name back in, even if it shakes." She didn't cry, but her eyes shimmered. She squeezed my hands once, then let go. I left the library just after dusk, the air damp with the promise of rain again. As I walked to the bus stop, my phone buzzed in my coat pocket. This time I checked it. One new voicemail, Jennifer. I considered letting it wait, but something in me was tired of avoiding the next thing. I pressed play. Her voice was quiet, strained. "Margaret, Emma's been asking about you. I told her we'd write you a letter together, but then she asked if she could draw instead. She made something for you. I don't know what it means to you, but she said give it to Grandma when she's ready to come home." There was a pause, just breathing. She doesn't know everything. I don't know how to explain it without breaking something in her, but I know I can't pretend anymore. If you want to see the drawing, I can leave it at the front desk of the motel, or the library. I'll wait for your reply. The message ended. I stood at the edge of the sidewalk, the world rolling quietly past me, cars with tired engines, street lamps blinking into life, the hum of a city that doesn't slow down just because one woman had her life rearranged. I didn't know if I was ready to see the drawing, but I was ready to reply. The next morning, I woke before the sun, not because of noise or habit, but because something inside me stirred and refused to rest. I sat up slowly in bed, letting the quiet motel air wrap around me like a reminder I was still in between things. Not back, not forward, just here. I dressed without overthinking. Wool coat, warm slacks, scarf tucked carefully beneath the collar. The red beanie stayed on, not out of need anymore, but choice. It had come to mean something. Not comfort exactly, more like declaration. At the front desk, a young man I'd never seen before looked up from his phone. "Miss Patterson?" I nodded. He bent down behind the counter and pulled out a large manila envelope. "Dropped off last night," he said. "Woman said it was personal." I took it with a quiet "thank you" and walked to the small sitting area near the vending machines. There was no one around, just a flickering fluorescent bulb overhead and a humming soda fridge to keep me company. I sat down and opened the envelope with slow, deliberate fingers. Inside was a folded piece of construction paper, slightly wrinkled at the edges, drawn in crayon. A tree, large, with sweeping branches and uneven green scribbles for leaves. Beneath it, a small figure sat on a bench. Gray hair, a red hat. Next to her, a girl with stick legs and long yellow lines for pigtails held her hand. Above them, in crooked blue letters, it said, "I want to sit with you again, Grandma." My throat tightened. I placed the drawing on my lap and stared at it until the lines blurred. It wasn't just a child's wish, it was a question, an invitation. I ran my finger over the crayon strokes, not perfect, not neat, but clear. Emma hadn't been taught to say sorry in the ways adults expect. But this was apology the way children understand it. No justifications, just love returned with both hands. There was no note from Jennifer, no explanation, just the drawing. It was enough. Back in my room, I set the picture on the desk and turned on my laptop. I opened my inbox, found Jennifer's last message, and clicked reply. I typed slowly, "Thank you for bringing her heart to me. I see it clearly. I'm not ready to return to that house, but I'd like to meet Emma, somewhere neutral. A park bench, if she still remembers the one. Let her choose. I will come. I hit send before I could second-guess myself. Then I folded the drawing once, gently, and tucked it inside my notebook between the pages that still held bullet points and grievances, a different kind of truth, now kept. I spent the day in quiet preparation. I ironed my cleanest blouse and repacked my suitcase, even though I wasn't going anywhere that night. It just felt right to tidy the edges of a chapter nearly closed. By evening, I received a reply. Margaret. She asked if the pond still has ducks. I told her maybe. She wants to go see. Tomorrow, 10 a.m., South Glenbury Park. I'll be there too, but I'll keep distance. Thank you for saying yes. Jennifer. I read it twice, then turned off the screen. The next morning, the sun was bright enough to cast long shadows as I stepped off the bus near the park's southern gate. The familiar iron arch overhead had been painted since I last walked beneath it. A sign hung nearby about upcoming community renovations. The old bench still stood beneath the wide oak that shed its leaves late in the season. And there she was. Emma stood by the pond in a pink coat with silver stars. Her hands were shoved into her pockets and her boots were slightly too big, maybe hand-me-downs or bought to last the season. She spotted me before I had a chance to wave. She ran, not hesitantly, not with uncertainty, but in the way only children know how to cross distance, completely. Grandma! I knelt just in time to catch her. She wrapped her arms around my shoulders like no time had passed, like she had always expected this reunion. I held her tightly, my eyes pressed shut, letting the warmth of her little frame fill the space I hadn't realized was still hollow. I brought bread, she said when we finally pulled apart, for the ducks. You remembered, I smiled. We sat on the bench. She talked quickly about school, about how she got to be the line leader last week, about how Jennifer made pancakes but burned the first batch and made the fire alarm beep. I listened without interruption, nodding, laughing when I meant it, touching her hand when her story slowed. Jennifer stayed at a respectful distance, sitting on a separate bench across the path, eyes lowered to a book she likely wasn't reading. I didn't wave, but I didn't turn away either. Are you coming home now? Emma asked softly as we watched the ducks. I looked out at the water. No, sweetheart, not just yet, but this is our place too, remember? She nodded. Then I'll come here, when I miss you. You'll always know where to find me, I said. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small folded slip of paper. This is our bench, she whispered. I made a sign, just for us. I opened it. A jagged crayon drawing of the bench and two stick figures, holding hands again. Above it, in purple letters, reserved for Grandma and me. I didn't cry. I just kissed the top of her head and whispered, best sign I've ever seen. I returned to the motel that afternoon with a folded crayon sign in my coat pocket and the faint scent of leaves still clinging to my sleeves. Emma's hug lingered longer than the moment itself, tucked into my ribs like a warm reminder that some bonds remain, even when others fracture. The front desk clerk smiled as I passed. Looks like a good day, he said. It was, I replied. Inside my room, I laid the sign carefully on the desk, reserved for Grandma and me. The purple letters curved awkwardly, the way children write before the world teaches them, symmetry matters. I didn't want to flatten the folds. I wanted to keep the creases, the evidence of small hands holding it tightly. I sat down with my notebook and flipped past pages filled with legal updates and public remarks. This page was for something else. Emma remembered. I paused, then added. And she waited, not for me to forget, but for me to be ready. There was something sacred in that, in a child's patience, in her refusal to let absence become final. That evening, Eleanor from Legal Aid called. We've received a settlement offer, she said. I sat straighter. What kind? They're proposing to dissolve the loan entirely, forgo any profit made on the property expansion. In exchange, they're requesting no criminal charges and a full transfer of the house back into your name. My throat tightened. They're backing down? They're tired, Margaret. The bank doesn't want the publicity. Jennifer's employer has made quiet inquiries, and your media presence has well reminded people that silence isn't compliance. I looked at the notebook, at the paper sign still sitting beside it. They want to avoid accountability, I said. They want a clean slate, Eleanor corrected. You don't have to agree, but it's a viable option. The fraud case would still be documented, just not prosecuted. I leaned back. Can I have time to think? Of course, but not long. They're nervous. Use it. After I hung up, I stood at the window and looked out at the same view I'd been waking to for weeks. A parking lot, a flickering lamppost, the shadowed ripple of someone wheeling a suitcase toward the curb. It had become strangely familiar, stripped of charm, but steady. By the time the sun dipped below the roofline, I knew what I wanted. I called Eleanor back. "Tell them I'll accept the house," I said, "but I won't sign anything that suggests I was ever confused about what happened." There was a beat of silence on the line. Then she said, "Good." The next morning, I received an email from Channel 7. They were doing a follow-up segment titled "The Cost of Taking Her Voice." They wanted to know if I would speak again, this time not as a victim, but as a contributor, a guest expert. Not a guest, not background, a woman with something to say. I responded with a short message. Yes, but only if we also talk about recovery, not just loss. I spent the rest of the day packing, not to leave in haste, but because it was time. The motel room had been a cocoon, a place to breathe, to mourn, to sharpen, but I didn't belong in a holding pattern anymore. A colleague of mine from the school district had reached out the week before. There was an apartment opening up in a small senior complex near the elementary school, modest, clean, and 2 blocks from the park. I called to confirm. "I'll take it," I said. The next day, I moved in. No one made a fuss. The landlord handed me the key and said, "Second floor, elevator's stiff, but works." I thanked him, stepped inside, and shut the door behind me with a quiet kind of ceremony. The space was small, but full of light. 2 windows overlooked the street, and a little table sat in the corner like it had been waiting for someone to sit down and write something that mattered. I unpacked slowly. My books, my folders, the drawing Emma made, which I pinned to the fridge with a free real estate magnet someone had left in the mailbox. Then I poured tea and sat by the window. When the sun reached the halfway point across the floor, I got up and walked. It wasn't far to the park. I passed 2 coffee shops, a bookstore I'd forgotten still existed, and a church with a weathered wooden bench out front, where a couple of teenagers sat, heads bent over a phone. And then I reached the gate. The bench was still there. The ducks were louder than usual that day, splashing around a half-frozen patch of pond. Leaves rustled behind me, but I didn't turn around. I just sat. I sat the way I had so many times before I forgot how valuable stillness could be. A small voice called from behind, "Grandma?" I turned. Emma stood with her backpack slipping off one shoulder, her cheeks red from the cold. "I told Mommy I wanted to walk here after school," she said. "Did she walk with you?" "She followed," Emma said with a grin, "from way back, but I came alone at the end." I opened my arms. "Then come sit, partner." She climbed up beside me and leaned her head on my shoulder. "I like this better than home," she said after a while. I didn't answer. I just kissed the top of her head again. Because some things can't be taken back, but others find their way home.